Welcome to a lecture on blood vessels. Here we have a diagram of the cardiovascular system. As you can see, it includes the pulmonary circuit and the systemic circuit. In this diagram, red happens to symbolize oxygenated blood that is flowing through veins, and blue happens to symbolize poor oxygenated blood that is flowing through arteries. However, this doesn't necessarily mean that veins only carry rich oxygenated blood or that arteries only carry poor oxygenated blood. In actuality, veins and arteries indicate the direction of blood flow to and from the heart, while the colors red and blue happen to signify the oxygen content of the blood that's being carried. Arteries are blood vessels that carry blood away from the heart, as we see here with the pulmonary artery. Blood is being pumped away from the heart to be replenished with oxygen molecules in the lungs. Veins are blood vessels that carry blood to the heart, as we see here with the pulmonary vein that is coming from the lungs to the heart to pump through the systemic circulation. The systemic circulation is where blood is pumped throughout the peripheral systems of the body. There are many different kinds of blood vessels that differ in function. However, their structures and features are generally all the same. As we see here, they both have tunica systems here, and their structures are almost identical. They differ in size and content of what's in them. We see here that the walls of the artery happen to be thicker than the walls of the vein. This is a great example of form follows function. Arteries and arterioles happen to have thicker walls than veins and venules because arteries receive larger surges of blood since they are closer to the heart, and they also receive greater amounts of pressure than veins do. Each vessel has a structure called a lumen. This is a hollow passageway that allows the blood to flow through the vessels. Here is the lumen of the vein, and here is the lumen of the artery. Arteries have smaller lumens than veins to help maintain the blood pressure that moves through its system. Their thick walls and small lumens are also responsible for more rounded shape. As we see in this micrograph of the artery and vein side by side, the artery has thicker walls and a smaller lumen. It's important to note that in this picture, the vein happens to be collapsed, but if it wasn't collapsed, you could probably fit almost 4 lumens from the artery. Since vein and venules deliver oxygen-rich blood to the rest of the body, the initial pressure caused by the heart contractions decreases significantly. This is why the walls of the veins are thinner, as we see here. Their larger lumens allow for more blood flow with less vessel resistance. Some veins, like the ones in our limbs and lower extremities, have valves that aid in the unidirectional flow of the blood towards the heart. This is important because the blood flow in these areas tend to be under the effects of lower pressure and gravity. The wall of blood vessels are composed of living cells that produce waste as any other living cells. Since blood happens to pass through the vessels at a rather fast pace, there is not enough time for the blood in the lumen to deliver nutrients to these cells. Arteries have thick walls that are not ideal for nutrients to be delivered through diffusion. So larger arteries and veins have small blood vessels within their walls known as vasa vasorum, which literally translates to vessels of the vessels. This provides the cell with essential nutrient and waste exchange. As we go back to this picture up here, we can see that in the walls of the artery, they're so thick that the vasa vasorum is contained in the outer layers. Here it is here. Otherwise, the pressure from the blood passing through the artery would cause them to collapse. Since there is less pressure in the veins, You can see that the vasa vasorum is located closer to the lumen. The lumen would be here. It's much closer. Also, the walls are much thinner. As we see here, these are the tunica systems of the arteries and veins and their comparison in functions. The tunica intima, also called the tunica interna, is composed of epithelial and connective tissues. Damage to the lining of the tunica intima, known as endothelium, and the exposure to collagenous fibers is the primary cause of clot formation. Here, endothelium. Before, endothelium was considered a lining between the blood and the lumen. However, recent studies have shown that endothelium aids in regulating capillary exchange and alternating blood flow. The endothelium releases chemicals that can constrict the smooth muscle within the walls of the vessel to increase blood pressure. Overproduction of this chemical, endothelins, may contribute to hypertension and cardiovascular disease, as we'll see later. In larger arteries, there is a distinct thick layer of elastic fibers known as internal elastic membranes, sometimes referred to as the internal elastic lamina. This provides structures and allows the vessel to stretch. It is also permeated with small openings that allow exchange of materials between the tunics. Internal elastic membranes are not present in veins. Tunica media is the middle layer of the vessel wall. This is generally the thickest layer in the arteries. It consists of smooth muscle that is supported by elastic fibers that are arranged in circular sheets. Contraction and relaxation of the circular muscles change the diameter of the vessel's lumen. In arteries, contraction of the smooth muscle in the vessel wall, known as vasoconstriction, decreases the blood flow by making the lumen narrower and increases blood pressure. Similarly, when the muscle is relaxed, vasodilation increases blood flow by making the lumen wider, thus decreasing blood pressure. Vasodilation and vasoconstriction are regulated by small vascular nerves called nervi vasorum, also translates to nerves of vessels. We'll see that here. Arteries closest to the heart have the thickest walls. They are known as elastic arteries because all three of the tunics contain large amounts of elastic fibers that allow them to expand and recoil as blood surges through them. As you see here, all these elastic fibers. Elastic arteries are also referred to as conducting arteries because it is capable of accepting large amounts of blood and can conduct or direct it to smaller branches. As blood travels farther away from the heart, there is less need for elastic fibers in the tunica intima. These are the elastic fibers. As we see here in the muscular artery, there are much less of the elastic fibers. The increased amount of smooth muscle in the tunica media here allows muscular arteries to play an important role in vasoconstriction. However, their decreased amount of elastic fibers make it hard for them to expand. But elasticity is less important since the blood pressure isn't as strong farther away from the heart. The endothelium releases chemicals that can constrict the smooth muscle within the walls of the vessels to increase blood pressure. But overproduction of this chemical, endothelins, may contribute to hypertension and cardiovascular disease. Atherosclerosis is an example that can result from the buildup of fatty calcified deposits in an artery. Here is the foam or plaque that becomes built up in the artery and it's being calcified. This blockage causes excess strain on blood vessels because as the plaque builds up, the artery becomes narrower and narrower, resulting in high blood pressure and inefficient blood flow. The more that the plaque builds up, the less space the blood has to flow, and that puts strain on the walls of the blood vessels. Capillaries only have two major layers, the basement membrane and the endothelial layer, also known as the tunica intima. At this point, vasoconstriction and vasodilation are not so important, and there's also almost no pulse. The lumen of capillaries measure up to 1 blood cell wide, as to give every red blood cell the opportunity to transfer its oxygen and nutrients to the surrounding cells, and also to collect the waste through diffusion. There are three types of capillaries. In this slide, we see a continuous capillary. They have a complete endothelial lining with tight junctions and intercellular clefts that allow for easy diffusion and exchange of small molecules like glucose, water, hormones, and white blood cells called leukocytes. The intercellular cleft will open a bit wider so that leukocytes can readily leave the capillary in response to an injury on the body. Here we have a fenestrated capillary, which are porous, and in addition to their tight junctions, they have these holes here that allow larger molecules to pass through the capillaries. These capillaries are common in places like the small intestine and the kidneys. Though water and smaller molecules can pass faster through these pores are not big enough for proteins or cells to pass through. And the third type of capillary is called sinusoid capillary. They're different from the fenestrated capillaries that have smaller pores. In this case, sinusoid capillaries are capillaries that have incomplete basement membranes, as you see here, and intercellular gaps in the endothelial layer. This allows large molecules, proteins, and cells to pass through. These are usually found in places like the liver, the spleen, and bone marrow, because in the liver, there's a production of proteins like albumin that need to enter the bloodstream, and sinusoid capillaries allow that process to take place. Here we see that capillaries lead to capillary beds, where there are pre-capped sphincters that help control the blood supply. Here are the sphincters. These sphincters open and close to regulate the blood supply, and it is important for when our bodies may experience extreme changes in temperature. These are the reasons why some of us may experience frostbite when it's really cold and we are exposed to those harsh climates. But this allows the blood supply to be cut off at maybe the toes, the fingers, or the nose, so that you can preserve blood supply for vital organs. And I don't know about you, but I'd sacrifice a toe to frostbite if that meant I can keep my organs. Veins and venules lead blood back to the heart. The closer we get to the heart, the larger and thicker the veins become. Referring back to this picture, of the artery and vein, like I mentioned before, the vein is collapsed. Because they don't have as much elastic fibers, the lumen of the vein cannot hold its shape like the lumen of the artery here. Arteries may be thicker than veins, but veins have the ability to expand and hold more blood. Veins hold more blood than arteries do at any given time, and there happens to be more veins than arteries in the human body. And here we see how the nervi vasorum are the nerves that allow the veins to vasoconstrict or vasodilate in response to maybe changes in temperature. And that's it. Thank you.